Who has still not been added to Poppy Playtime, and who are they promising to add in Chapter 5? Will we see all the monsters that have already had numerous references and even cassette tapes made about them, but they couldn't appear as full-fledged characters? What is the probability that they will appear in the next chapter? Let's try to figure this out. The first thing that comes to mind is the rejected toys, the monsters that were left in storage, which we've long forgotten about all the way back since Chapter 2. We even found a full cassette about one of them. An employee was complaining that his idea wasn't accepted, even though the reasons for rejection were pretty clear. The elegant bear sitting on the toilet and doing its business didn't appeal to the executives at Playtime. I even think that this toy didn't even reach the real management like Late Pierre. Moreover, in the official rejection letter, they even added a note in marker. Who could have come up with such an idea? And whoever came up with it should be ashamed. But the Poopy Bear isn't the only one that got rejected. There's a whole series of toys, like the oven with eyes and a monobrow, or the little ball with limbs. With the latter, I think the reason for the rejection is obvious. Not creative enough. And Playtime is precisely famous for its creativity. We can consider such rejected ideas as tests. But some genius came up with the idea of a stone in the form of a toy with eyes. A stone! What was he thinking? But among these rejected toys, there are some pretty good examples, like Daisy the Flower. They even planned to include her as an antagonist or opponent in Chapter 2, but the reason for her cancellation is unclear. The story says that Daisy was too scary, so Playtime rejected her. Well, all kinds of monsters that don't look like themselves and other similar creatures are certainly not scary, but after seeing Daisy, they decided to reject her immediately. The likelihood of any of these characters appearing in the next chapter is extremely low, as they are rejected toys, and there's nothing more to say here. Daisy has a higher chance of appearing, as she was already planned as a full-fledged character and even has her own posters and cardboard cutouts in the game, unlike the other toys in storage. So we can assume that during that time the mascot was being developed, and they could have used her for experiments. Maybe that's the story they'll come up with. Let's move on. The lamb. This lamb doesn't have a name, just the lamb. However, we already have a nightmare sheep, so why would we need another lamb? The thing is, this one was planned earlier. Probably not as a full character, but they definitely plan to add it as a poster, as a reference. The chances of it being added in the next chapter are virtually zero, if not negative. After all, the character wasn't even added in Chapter 3. So what's the point of adding it as a reference in a poster or somewhere else? Unless the YouTuber specifically requests it. After all, the image already exists, but I'm sure it won't be added. There's a monster that was the most discussed at one point, but then everyone forgot about it. The long-legged daddy. Will he appear in the next chapter? There were references to him in both Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, but for some reason they decided not to do that in Chapter. Some even thought that Daddy and the long-legged baby would appear in Chapter 4, but perhaps as allies because Mama is crazy, while Daddy and Baby could be calm. For some reason, characters of opposite genders tend to take different sides. If the guy is evil, the girl is good. This seems to be a recurring pattern in many stories and games. You can't help but notice how this logic plays out in different situations, and it's quite intriguing how creators often follow these gender-specific roles. When a male character is portrayed as villainous, the female counterpart is often shown as the hero. You have to jump from this logic if you want to see things from a new perspective and break the mold. Well, I don't know, in Project Playtime, for example, Daddy is evil. So if he appears in the next chapter, don't expect him to be kind or suddenly turn into a good guy. Although, who knows, characters can always surprise you, and sometimes they take unexpected turns that break all previous patterns. Kissy Missy in Hour of Joy also seemed to be evil, a twist that took many by surprise. Poppy, on the other hand, helped the prototype in Hour of Joy, which was another unexpected move. There are always nuances in these characters that add complexity to their personalities. So, even calm and good monsters have their flaws, but in the end, they aren't aggressive. This is what makes these characters more human-like and relatable. The imperfections of these monsters, whether they show a tendency toward kindness or cruelty, make them more interesting. They are not all-out evil, rather they have their moments of vulnerability and kindness that add depth to their stories. There's always a possibility that Daddy will be added to the game in the future, but how high or low that chance is, I don't know. Speculation about future updates can be fun, but it's also a bit uncertain. It's one of those things that keeps the fans engaged and talking. I wouldn't even be surprised if the next chapter adds more female or male analogs, characters that are counterparts or foils to the existing ones. For example, with Doughman, it might turn out that he once had a clay girlfriend, and they would call her Dommy, short for Dominica. This idea might sound a bit out there, but you never know with these kinds of games. The possibility of new characters and backstories being added in creative ways is what keeps things fresh and exciting for the community. With Boxy Boo, the chances are already higher, much higher than the others, because Boxy Boo is constantly being talked about, and he has already been added to Project Playtime. Boxy Boo has become one of the more iconic characters, partly due to his unique design and partly because he represents the fun, quirky side of the game. He has essentially become the symbol of that separate multiplayer game, with fans rallying around his character. The hype surrounding Boxy Boo is a good indicator that he will continue to play a significant role in the game, and fans are likely to see more of him in future updates. The popularity of certain characters often dictates the direction in which a game evolves, and Boxy Boo certainly has the potential to become a fan favorite that stays around for a long time. And what's most interesting is that he's still alive, running around hunting for someone, and here I would definitely rate the probability of his appearance in the next chapter as quite high. The developers may change their minds and not add Boxy Boo, but I think they've tried to incorporate him into the story or gameplay at some point, but something always went wrong. This, by the way, is a separate story about monsters, which I'll talk about later. I believe that Boxy Boo will even get his own boss fight or chase. Perhaps the chase will be brief, and in the end, Boxy Boo might be defeated, but maybe not. Usually new characters get more time, but the older ones, whom we've known for years, are probably starting to wear out. So I expect that Boxy Boo might appear in a small cameo. Also, it seems like the remaining characters, like Cat Bee, Candy Cat, and Brawn, are going to be added at some point. It's been confirmed that all three exist within the Project Playtime universe. They are separate experiments, and I'd say there's a good chance we'll see them in future chapters. These characters are not just random designs. They are part of the established lore of the game, and their addition seems almost certain. They were even going to include them in Chapter 3, though for various reasons, they didn't make the cut. At least we've heard that Cat Bee was planned to be a monster among the smiling creatures, which adds an interesting layer to her character. The developers have shown in the past that they are not afraid to experiment with new ideas and characters, and these three are no exception. But first of all, she didn't fit in with this group of creatures as well as the developers might have hoped, which could be one of the reasons for the delay in her inclusion. Moreover, why would we need additional separate monsters when we already have some? The balance of the game's environment and mechanics is always a priority, and adding new creatures needs to make sense within that framework. So, they're still thinking about how to best include them, but they've already been confirmed, and some of them were even shown in one of the videos by Mob Entertainment. Their eventual inclusion is highly likely, and it's only a matter of time before players get to interact with them in future updates or chapters. Write your opinion in the comments. Also, write who you would like to see the most, maybe even all of them.